Hello, welcome to the Professors of Immigration podcast and video series. We are here today to talk to you about some very important matters with the current COVID-19 descending upon the world, and especially the United States of America, and this message going out to all of the foreign nationals there here who are facing current immigration status questions. I would like to take a moment to introduce you to my co-host, attorney Robert Perkins, who graduated magna cum laude from Beloit College and received his JD from the University of Illinois College of Law. He's been practicing for some almost 30 years and is very well known among immigration practitioners. He is also known for his time serving at Denton's, one of the world's largest law firms. And he has gone on to establish his own practice, focusing exclusively on immigration law, green cards, U.S. citizenship, and really anything immigration related.
And I would like to introduce Lorraine D'Alessio. Lorraine is a rock star, and she was considered and still is a rising star. Now her star has risen. In fact, she was in 2017 selected a leader in law. In 2018, an enterprising woman in the law, and she has also been selected as part of Super Lawyers and runs a very nice-sized boutique law firm with offices headquartered in Los Angeles, but now all over the world.
Well, so please tune in each week as we will be providing to you the most cutting-edge information on what is going on in the immigration landscape for the United States at this time. It's important to us that we make immigration understandable and accessible to you, no matter how complex this field gets and how ever-changing the laws and rules and regulations are. What may stand now may not stand in a year or two from now. So we really do feel that these weekly updates are very important to you, especially at this time.
Yeah, things are changing every week, and Lorraine and I have been talking about this, and one of the things we wanted to emphasize to people is that there are still many parts of immigration that are open or that are partially open. So one of the first things we wanted to cover with this is what's open and what's closed. So, Lorraine, I know your practice has focused a lot on people coming from outside in, especially in the entertainment industry and investors. And so can you speak a little bit on that piece?
Yes, absolutely. So one very important component of U.S. immigration that is all shut down now is the public-facing offices. This not only includes biometric appointments and those in-persons you may have at USCIS field offices where you would go for those biometrics appointments, typically regarding your adjustment portion of your green card filing. But also, they have now closed all of the consulates globally. And these are very important outlets, of course, when you are coming to present documents for your investor visa. And this would include E-1, and unfortunately, they have closed for a temporary time, and we are getting updates as to when they will be opening. These consulates are also because after you get your non-immigrant working visa, for most countries around the world, you will be going there, stamping your passport, the visa stamp your passport, to then enter the United States. So if you haven't yet gotten your stamp and your passport yet, also have an I-797 approval notice on hand. Unfortunately, you will not be able to enter until the consulates reopen. So you do need to be in touch with us, your immigration counsel, so we can keep you up to date. And also, there may be changes in how you will be going about that interview. So we definitely want to be in touch with you and guiding you along this process. I also should mention that for E2s and E1s, these investor visas, these are temporary visas, yet can be renewed indefinitely so long as you are an entrepreneur and running your company in the United States. And you may or may not have that same company running in your home country. There is a great deal of preparation that needs to be done way ahead of time before you even go to the consulate. So even though the consulates right now are not taking in-person appointments, there is still plenty to do in terms of that team that you have from the front end, preparing all those documents, coordinating with corporate accounting, business plans, and really putting together that rockstar application to pass very well that interview to get your visa in your passport there. So for the E1s and E2s, that an entire adjudication typically happens at that in-person interview. You may get follow-up questions, but typically most of it happens at that interview. So even though we are on a pause for the interview, still plenty to do, and typically you would start that process 3 to 4 months in advance anyway. And this is the timeline that we are likely looking at going forward. Please go ahead.
I wanted to mention that Lorraine and I were talking about this for people that are interested in getting an investor visa, whether it's the temporary one called the E2 or the green card version called the EB5, that because the economy is unfortunately not doing well, there may be some bargains that people can get in terms of investments, investing in buying a business or real estate may be a lot more feasible now than it was, and unfortunately sometimes in this kind of awful way, people can get more bang for the buck, so to speak. So there may be some opportunity in that for entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention in terms of a silver lining. The other thing too is, and I think people don't know this, Lorraine had mentioned that the field offices of the Immigration Service are closed, so there's no interviews. The biometrics are closed, so there's no fingerprinting for work permits and some other things. However, the service centers of immigration are open. So people that want to, are in the United States and they want to change their status, let's say they're a tourist and they want to change to some kind of work visa, like an H-1B or an O visa, they can still do that. And there's no issue with those service centers. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that piece. But.
The service centers also include the filings for marriage cases as well. So, we're all trying to keep to home and keeping close to our loved ones during this time. So perhaps you may have a loved one who is a United States citizen and you're perhaps thinking about getting married. Well, there is actually still a way to get those petitions filed, and by the mere filing of that petition and getting that receipt notice, it's quite powerful from an immigration status, keeping yourself here and protected as you move to the next steps of the marriage sponsorship application. So I would also say that those are still moving ahead and still processing as well. And we are receiving approvals and follow-up questions from officers even last week, so processing quite well. I would say also that being at home and being close to your loved ones, but also having more free time on your hands than you typically would, a lot of these working visas are quite a bit of work on the front end if you haven't yet started one. So if you're here, for example, an OPT and have applied for the H-1B lottery, however, were not selected, and are looking at the alternatives from H-1B, which could include an O-1 visa, for example, extraordinary ability for those in sciences, technology, or even entertainment. It would be a good time to be working on accumulating those documents for the criteria that you have to address in order to file an application. And typically that process does take weeks to even months to prepare. So a good time to speak with your immigration staff on that as well.
Yeah, even in the marriage context, I was going to mention that I have a lot of married couples. Some of them get their documents together sooner than others, but several new clients that have come in and they have a lot of time at home now. So it's, really easy for them to order, their birth certificates or marriage certificates online, email those to our office and get those filed and get that process started. So that piece is really key. Immigration has said in terms of the field offices, at least right now publicly, that they've said that they're going to open May 4th. What do you think about that? Do you think that's realistic?
Doing quite a bit of work in entertainment and technology, I'm seeing quite a few corporates rescheduling important initiatives and projects that they're doing to May and some June. So perhaps that is a realistic timeline that many are actually planning for. So in terms of the employer end, but of course every employer will be different in terms of how the world's changes are affecting their business plan. However, I think California does have the most per capita millionaires right now in the world, is it? So perhaps we'll be seeing quite a bit of upkick when we start to see the lifts come up after the virus is calming down.
It's interesting because one of the other things that's closed at the moment is the immigration courts, and they're closed right now until they've postponed any individual hearing, which is a trial or master hearing, until May 1st. And I'm going to relate this in a minute to what you were saying. However, it's interesting because they've been trying to get this e-filing system up for years. Let me repeat, 4 years. And in the midst of this crisis, they're allowing attorneys to email motions to each individual court. So I was just thinking as we were talking about the field offices, I wonder if field offices would allow Zoom interviews for marriages or anything else if this thing extends for a long period of time, if some of the technology of the 21st century will appear at the immigration service. So.
Well, we're currently seeing telephonic interviews being done and wondering how that's going to translate for the marriage cases. So we'll need to keep you all updated on our next podcast.
Wait, where are the telephonic interviews? That's news to me. For what type of visas or?
It's being discussed for the adjustments so that they don't get held up. So we're starting to see some movement there, and perhaps it will come to fruition, which would be great.
That would be great. And I thought, Lorraine, I didn't know that. Are all the embassies closed? Are some of them still open?
Really?
Is there a difference in the embassies? That was my impression, but I could be wrong.
Well, this is quite inside information, I want to say, because it doesn't seem to be readily available when you're looking online or so on. But we are able to process cases at the U.S.-Canadian border that are L1 as well as TN cases. The updating of your I-94s for those with E2s as well is occurring. And so there definitely is some movement, but along the land borders to the U.S. There's some movement as well on the Mexican border, but it's definitely been a lot more strict on that side. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know that the closure order has exceptions for investment, commerce, essential workers. I know tourism is banned on both sides. If somebody is applying for a new visa, like a new O1, and they want to interview in Mexico, are they doing those interviews at the embassies?
Unfortunately, they are not. However, what we're seeing is for those, obviously, that have already done the interview and now just comes through their status through the border, that is, in fact, occurring smoothly. But this is a week-to-week matter, and we're not quite sure at any point where we actually see a shutdown of the borders. And we are seeing a shutdown of the borders internationally. Vietnam is shut down. El Salvador. We are seeing countries just seal it up. So if that happens, then we hope to be able to get the message to you all sooner before it happens and get some warning to you. But it could be the case depending on how this virus goes in terms of its containment. But I think it's quite interesting how, I mean, since immigration law has been immigration law, family unification has been a pillar, most important principle of all of it. And yet we have so many families separated right now. There are a lot of families and there's been widely documented cases in the newspaper where you have a couple that has been in the middle of their marriage sponsorship case, but did it consular. So their interviews were done through, for example, Montreal. And one was living on one side of the border, the other on the other, and are now stuck in limbo right now. And this heartbreaking, of course. I know about one couple that hasn't seen, in the middle of it, and so haven't seen each other in 5 months. And so now, indefinitely not sure when will be the next time that they see each other. So we are hoping to see compassionate grounds extended here for some of these cases that are processing and some of these really strict rules that we've always followed, a loosening of those. And I believe, right, Robert, there's been quite a bit of outcry from the immigration lawyers to USCIS. Yeah. They loosen up here a little, extend. They have created this special circumstances category in which we can apply for certain extensions for clients that are to, expiry or deadline to help to protect them. Yet, at the same time, it's a little bit ambiguous as to what that all includes and how far-reaching. So perhaps we could see that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good topic to talk about. I mean, immigration has said that any requests for evidence or notices of intent to deny, that there are deadlines are automatically extended for those. They haven't been clear about how much they're extended, but they have said that they will extend those and consider late responses. However, in response to the American Immigration Lawyers Association, as you mentioned, they still have not said if somebody expires and they don't submit something that late, like let's say they're on a tourist visa and they want to change status to an O1 or some kind of work visa, they still have to comply with the deadline to file before the tourist visa expires. So, but I wanted to ask you before I forget, I know immigration has announced this policy of satisfactory departure. In other words, for people that are from visa-exempt countries, mostly in Western Europe, that get 90-day, what they call ESTA visas, immigration has said that they would consider extending them or giving people a satisfactory departure for 30 days. And I have not done those cases yet, and I know you have, so can you update me on and our audience about what the results have been so far, how long they're taking, and if there's any kind of differences that you see depending upon what city you're applying in.
Indeed, great question. So we have been processing those cases, Delesio Law Group, and are happy to report that they have all been approved. Which is really quite groundbreaking because this visitor visa, temporary or business meeting under ESTA visa waiver for Schengen country citizens have been extremely the rules previously. So if you were to overstay previously, a violation could mean that you would not only be deported without trial, but also never be able to use the program ever again. So now under Trump, we're seeing being made available under the COVID-19, this satisfactory departure rule, right, Robert? And that is has to be applied for, and what we're doing is before 14 to 15 days before the expiry. And we are putting forth the case to talk about COVID, of course, but need to really show that this person that's been affected, it's unsafe for them to travel. And really address specifically that joint between COVID-19 and the development of COVID-19 and that beneficiary of this immigration benefit. So also all of the flight cancellations. evidence of this to include in the application. And, the applications that we have submitted have been quite lengthy. Not small applications, and even after we submitted them, being very comprehensive, we even got a couple follow-up questions. So knowing now the temperament of the officers and what the kind of detail that they want to see, this is not just a very simple application process. It includes not only the forms, but all supporting exhibits as well. Right now, we're seeing this rolled out at LAX, in Washington, and JFK. I have had cases at LAX and Washington so far, and it's been friendly, which is great to know. But you would need an employer to help you with this. Even we're finding this to be a quite detailed process, yet really happy that we're able to get the approvals. And in fact, our clients have been so thrilled that they did not have to get onto the airplane and really risk their lives. That we were seeing some compassion.
Very tight. And your website, I just want to mention for our viewers, Lorraine's website is D as in David, L as in lamp, G as in God, immigration.com. So if you need that service, Lorraine is a good person to get you that service. So yeah, thanks for the update on that.
Yes, well,
that's great.
It's really, I hope that we see some of these leniencies across other areas of immigration too, which is very much needed. But I will say that a lot of people, I think, and Robert, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as too, the shelter-in-place rules that we're seeing across the country, in LA and New York, really very strict, keeping at home, working from home. I feel that people should be checking in with their attorneys more, especially those that are employers, to make sure that their employees might not be violating any terms and conditions of their visas, particularly that we're transitioning from STEM OPT into their H-1B. There have been directives from USCIS that talk about needing to repost LCAs, labor certification applications, and even amend them if we're talking about a new work address. Also, have people been notifying their DSO from their schools to update the CIVIS system? I don't think that a lot of employers have been doing this. I've been checking in with my own clients and getting this all organized for them, and the knowledge has not been there, definitely. So I think it is recommended to really look at this, as well as TNs and L1s for that matter. Should we be filing amendments at this point? And I think it is a material change to where you're working. And it's not just about job duties. Those job duties might very well have changed now, though, since you're working from home as well. So I think we need to be conscious really about statuses, not just status expiring, but also about what you're actually supposed to be doing in that status, and reevaluating and being in touch with HR from the employer perspective, but also protecting yourself from the employee side.
Right. And in our next podcast, we are going to be talking about what happens to, there's been massive layoffs and firings and things like that. So what happens to folks that are on an H-1B visa or an L-1 visa, or that matter, an E-2 visa? I saw a posting about an E-2 manager. So there are definitely those firings or reassignments, as you mentioned, definitely trigger some obligations. And I think as part of our next podcast, we'll be talking about what people can do about those and what are the workarounds for those. One of which, if they're, fired, is they could try to get into another status, but there may be some other workarounds too that we want to get into. So, yeah. And so, okay. Now, are you, we mentioned E2s, we mentioned a few other things. I guess, I think it's a good time to summarize.
And I would also like to add just one other point for those that be very concerned about their immigration status now, and whether they can access public benefits right now. And we saw the public charge rule come out, and that was terrifying for a lot of people that we're processing green cards and going, wait a second, is the government now saying that we need to be very careful about people that are in the process of doing green cards, or even people that are non-immigrant visas, and we're going to do extensive background checks. We're going to make sure we're going to even do a credit check to see whether or not these people, the foreign national has gotten any benefits from the government at any time during the process. And there's been such a concern. How do people get health care? How do people help feed their families right now if they can't access unemployment insurance? Well, fortunately, we've seen the government come out and announce, but I would say it's been a little confusing, again, the parameters of this announcement, but to say that at least if you need to get testing for coronavirus or preventative care, even if you're paid by Medicaid, that would be okay. And you're not going to violate the public charge rule. Again, also saying the unemployment benefits can be accessed. However, I think there's quite a few question marks. How will the stimulus package come into play? And, and what do you think, Robert? How do you think that will come into this? And do you think the government will try to block people or make it more difficult for entrepreneurs to access some of these payroll protection programs, or loans being given federally through the banks? What do you think about that?
Well, it's hard to say. We don't have a clear policy on it. However, it depends on what you think good public policy is. Do we want to focus on investors here in the United States or businesses here? Do we want to focus on, we don't care where the person's coming from, we want to support the more viable businesses or the businesses that create more jobs? So that's a good question. And how will these public benefits, are public benefits in a sense, affect people that, let's say they are on an investor visa, or they're just somebody working here who gets a stimulus check? We don't know those things yet. And I think it's a good topic for another podcast. And one of the things I wanted to mention too is a lot of government policy about all this is emerging, which is why we are going to be casting every couple of days. So please go to dlgimmigration.com, which is Lorraine's website, or my website, immigrationprofessor.com, for the latest podcasts and announcements of these things as they develop. And there are a lot of questions that are, as Lorraine said, still unresolved, but we'll try to give you the latest announcements and maybe a little bit of prognostication or prediction of where we think it might go, so people can at least try to plan as best they can. So I think it'd be good if we can summarize a little bit about what we talked about today before we end the podcast. I think the big sort of good thing is that the immigration service centers are open, the places that actually processes the paperwork. That part of the immigration service is open. People that Lorraine had mentioned, people putting together their O1 extraordinary ability visas, those are things that can still be done. Marriage visas can still be done. So that's that piece is still open. Yeah. Were you going to say something?
We're again, so there has been so many changes since everyone is at home now, and we have the time. It is a good time to think about a visa down the road, but it's also a good time to remind ourselves, especially for those who went to school here and are transitioning and have been waiting for the results of H-1B. It might have taken quite a while for you to get here. There's a reason why you're here, and it's a time not to give up. It may take 3 to 6 months, perhaps, to prepare for that green card, or perhaps you're transitioning onto a non-immigrant visa like an O1, but it's also a good time to be putting together documents for that long-term plan and really talking to your immigration counsel, I think, and it's time to buckle down. And I think that there will be more compassion I think from the officers in the last 30 days, we had nearly 60 approvals hit our office. And
wow, nice. Is that O1s? Mostly?
Majority O1s, almost half.
Wow.
And I was amazed. I was amazed at all of the I-140s that were approved without even questions asked. So I would say that especially for those petitions where, the national interest waiver petition, EB1 petition, EB1A, EB1Bs, where one would be self-petitioning and really demonstrating your skills and accomplishments. But that takes time, gathering references, awards, URLs, so that you can down the road get your own status here all organized in terms of long-term. So I think it's an interesting time to take a pause, but also figure out life and
that's
and your goal. And what are we all here for anyway, other than the American dream? So I think it's
right. And well, that's really impressive. That's impressive. And it's interesting because prior to the COVID crisis, there were a lot of requests for evidence on those petitions and denials, and many practitioners in our area were really struggling. So that's really cool news. Being a teacher person or former teacher person, I'm going to make sure I summarize before we end. So we said that the Immigration Service Centers for paperwork are open and processing. That the field offices of immigration, the ones that actually have face-to-face contact with people for interviews, they are closed at least until the 4th of May. So, and possibly beyond that. And the interviews that had been scheduled for part of March and April are supposed to be rescheduled. The Department of Labor is open. We didn't mention that, but I will mention that. So for people going through the PERM or labor cert process, Department of Labor is open, and they actually realizes that some of the workplaces are closed and people are working remotely. And in some future podcasts, we'll talk a little bit about some of the adjustments that have been made to that process. The other piece we mentioned is that the immigration courts are closed at least until May 4th for any non-detained hearings, and all those hearings have been postponed. And finally, we talked a little bit about satisfactory departure and people on ESTA visas for 90 days and the fact that they've been able to get these 30-day extensions. So I thank everybody for listening, and thank my good colleague, Lorraine D'Alessio. You can find her on her website, dlgimmigration.com.
Great, thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.